Good morning. Okay, so we're starting a brand new chapter today. We're going to be working with a lot of percents. But when we work with percents, we're also going to convert to fractions and decimals. So first question, how do we turn these into fractions? Well, the first thing that you want to do is read your decimal. This decimal is read as 0 and 6/10. So we write 6/10 as 6/10. But your fractions always have to be reduced to lowest terms. So we're going to divide by 2. The only acceptable answer for 6/10 would be 3/5. This decimal is read 0 and 685 thousandths. So you're going to write the fraction exactly how you read your decimal. 685 thousandths is 685 thousandths. That is not reduced. So we know that numbers that end with 5s and 0s are divisible by 5. So we're going to make a division ladder for 685 and 1,000. We can divide both numbers by 5. 685 divided by 5 is 137. And 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. So this answer has to reduce to 137 200ths. Read your decimal, 44 hundredths. Write your fraction, 44 hundredths. That is not reduced to lowest terms. 44 divided by 4 is 11. And 100 divided by 4 is 25. So that fraction must be reduced to 11/25. Next question, how do we turn these into decimals? You're going to read the fraction, 7/10, and you're going to write the decimal, 7/10. Now, if the denominator is not a 10, 100, or 1,000, check your denominator and see if it's a factor of 10, 100, or 1,000, which this one is. The easiest way to turn a fraction into a decimal is if the denominator is a factor of 10, multiply 5 times 2 and 2 times 2. That gets us to 4/10, and that gets us to 4/10. If your denominator is not 10, 100, or 1,000, see if it's a factor of 10, 100, or 1,000. We know 20 times 5 is 100. So 17 times 5 is 85. As soon as you have a number over 10, 100, or 1,000, then you can simply write your decimal. So this fraction is 85 hundredths, and this decimal is also 85 hundredths. Check your denominator. Can you multiply to get 100? Yep. 25 times 4 and 2 times 4. That gets us to the fraction 8 hundredths, which we can easily convert to the decimal 8 hundredths. Fraction to decimal. Check your denominator. If your denominator is a factor of 100, multiply. So that gets us to 34 hundredths, which is 0 and 34 hundredths. Check your denominator. 20 times 5 is 100. And 13 times 5 is 65. So 13/20 equals 65 hundredths equals 65 hundredths. All right, bottom of the page. What happens if the denominator is not a factor of 100, like 8, 3, 15, 16, 8, and 8? If it's not, you're going to have to divide. We're going to do numerator divided by denominator. So we're going to do 5 divided by 8. We're going to add a decimal and 3 zeros. You can stop dividing when you get a 0 remainder or when you realize your decimal is going to repeat. So 5/8 is equal to 0 and 625 thousandths. If the denominator is not a factor of 10, 100, or 1,000, you're going to have to divide. Numerator divided by denominator. Add your decimals and 3 zeros. So this one is clearly repeating, so we can stop. So this equals 0 and 3/10 repeating. Make sure you put that repeating bar over that 3. 15 is not a factor of 100. So we're going to do numerator divided by denominator. Add your decimal and your 3 zeros. This is also going to start repeating. So we would write this as 0.73. Now notice that the 3's are the only digits that repeat. So that repeating line can only go over the 3, not the 7 and the 3. 16 is not a factor of 100. So we're going to do numerator divided by denominator. Add your decimals and your zeros. This one's going to come out to a 0 remainder. So 13/16 is equal to 0 and 8,125 10,000ths. Eight is not a factor of 100. Now, on this one, since it's a mixed number, I like to go ahead and write my answer box before I start dividing, because a lot of times what the kids do is they forget to include their whole number in front of the decimal. So I like to put the 5 point before I start so I don't forget that 5 in my final answer. So now we're going to figure out what 1 divided by 8 is. Add your decimal and your zeros. So that's 5 and 125 thousandths. Now this next one looks a little weird because it's improper, right? We're still going to do numerator divided by denominator, decimals with 3 zeros. So 2 and 125 thousandths. Next page, turn these into percents. All right, so we know a percent is always out of 100. So I'm going to take my decimal 35 hundredths. There's two different ways you could do this. Without doing the math, you can simply move that decimal 2 places to the right. So that equals 35%. Or you can write 35 hundredths as a fraction. And 35 hundredths also equals 35%. Method 1, slide that decimal twice to the right, which means you're going to have to insert a 0. So that equals 20%. Or if you start with your decimal 0 and 2/10, 2/10 is equal to 20 hundredths, and 20 hundredths is equal to 20%. Method 1, slide your decimal 2 places to the right. That's 18%. Or you can read that decimal as 18 hundredths. Since a percent is out of 100, 18 hundredths equals 18%. Slide that decimal 2 places to the right. That equals 0.045%. Slide your decimal twice to the right. That's 514%. Now, the number 5, 1 is 100%, 2 is 200%, 5 equals 500%, and 14 hundredths equals 14%. Put those two together, so that's 514% for that one. Turn these into percents. A percent is out of 100. So what I'm thinking is, how can I get this denominator to be 100? 5 times 20, 3 times 20. That gets me to 60 hundredths. A percent is out of 100, so 60 hundredths equals 60%. A percent is out of 100, so check your denominator. 20 is a factor of 100, so I'm going to do 20 times 5 and 19 times 5. That gets me to 95 hundredths, and that equals 95%. Retros, 3 is not a factor of 100. So we're going to do numerator divided by denominator, add your decimals and your 3 zeros. So this is a terminating decimal. Now, we've got a decimal sitting right here. To convert this to a percent, we're going to slide that decimal twice to the right. So this equals 37.5%. Percent is out of 100. To convert a fraction to a percent, check your denominator first. If your denominator is a factor of 100, you can quickly do 10 times 10 and 9 times 10 to get 90. 90 hundredths equals 90%. The number 2 is 200%. 87 hundredths is 87%. Put those two together, you get 287%. 15 is not a factor of 100. So we're going to do 13 divided by 15. Add your decimals and your zeros. This is going to start repeating. Slide that decimal twice to the right. So my decimal, let me make that a different color. My decimal's right here. I'm going to slide that decimal twice to the right. So this is going to be 86.6 repeating percent. Check your denominator. That is not a factor of 100. So we're going to do 7 divided by 8. Numerator divided by denominator. Add your decimals and your zeros. Now, this has a 1 sitting in front of it, so it's going to be 1.875. And we are turning this into a percent. Move that decimal twice to the right, make that a different color. Slide that decimal twice to the right. So that's going to be 187.5%. 187.5%. That would be your final answer. Check your denominator. A percent is out of 100. So we're going to do 25 times 4 and 12 times 4. That gets us to 48 hundredths. 48 hundredths is equal to 48%. Fraction to a percent. Check the denominator. You're going to have to do 4 divided by 9. So this is clearly repeating. So move that decimal twice to the right. So that equals 44.4 repeating percent. All right, how would we do this? 3 is what percent of 8? Make that a little bigger. 3 is what percent of 8? You're going to turn that into a fraction. We're going to do 3 divided by 8, which is 0.375. Slide that decimal twice to the right. That's 37.5%. What would these be as fractions? Okay, so to go from the decimal to the percent, it's 2 places to the right. To go from the percent to the decimal, it's 2 places to the left. So I've got a percent. First, I'm going to make it a decimal. So I'm going to take this decimal right here, and I'm going to move it once to the left around the 0, and then one more time to the left. So this equals 0.002, or 2 thousandths. 2 thousandths can be reduced. Divide by 2. Final answer as a fraction would be 1/500th. Percent to a decimal. Take your decimal, move it twice to the left. That is 875 thousandths, which equals 875 thousandths. That is going to reduce to 7/8. Now, if there is no decimal to start with, like in 225%, the decimal always starts behind the number. So add your decimal first, slide it twice to the left. So that equals 2 and 25 hundredths. That equals 2 and 25 hundredths, and that reduces to 2 1/4. All right, that is it for today. See you tomorrow.